Welcome back to the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. Throughout Season 2, Alexis and I have interviewed a diverse range of individuals who have shared their journeys towards excellence. We started with Broadway star and friend Jelani Remy. Next, we spoke with an elite college hockey player, Mia Brown, followed by a discussion Alexis and I had about the topic of perfectionism. Later, we spoke with Rosie Ramos, who has a thriving small business as an esthetician. And later, we spoke with CEO of the brain health company Like Minds, Peter Savas. Alexis and I then paused to talk about the idea of happiness in life and how to expand what it means to be happy, especially in the pursuit towards excellence. And after that, we spoke with Marissa Brainey, whose career included TV newscasting, being a TV personality, and also being a media expert consultant. Next, we spoke with Cape Cod tennis coach Kevin Peace. And last but not least, we spoke with our cousin, Joe Perella, known as Joe P. He's a rising star in the music scene, and he's been signed by Atlantic Records.
Okay, sure. Enough of the resumes of all these individuals. They're quite impressive. But as we know, and as we've been talking about, the resume is more about the outcome, the things that happen with a broad range of persistence, effort, energy, resources, collaboration. And the purpose of interviewing all these individuals was because we wanted to go behind the scenes to really look into that, to see what goes into the process, not just focus on the outcomes, though these people are incredibly impressive and we hold them in high esteem for so much of who they are and who they've become. But the process is at the heart of it all. The process is what we focus on every day in our work with individuals. You as a psychologist providing therapy and assessment, as a professor providing supervision and sports psychologist working with athletes, and me as an educational therapist, executive function coach, educator, professor. We knew that these guests had meaningful and insightful aspects of their journey, and so we try to ask curious and thoughtful questions about their experiences, their thoughts, their feelings, their relationships, what was meaningful to them in their life, and so much more. By doing so, our goal was to really shine a light on how their individual journeys were unique in their own ways, as they are for every individual, especially those that we work with on a daily basis. So there's really not a one-size-fits-all approach, going back to the UDL concept we explored in Season 1 and something that is woven into everything I do in my work and often my life. And when we think about it not being a one-size-fits-all approach to determining whatever success might mean to you or how you figure out when you've achieved excellence or what it takes to work towards it, it's such a subjective experience for each individual. And the purpose of this season especially, and pretty much overall the podcast, is for us to share some of the wisdom that we've gained in our work, in our professional lives and personal lives too, because it all plays a role in each other. It's all connected. But really thinking from, the perspective of others, that these people that you might see their accolades or their resumes and the things that they've accomplished, but really pulling the onion back, right? Pulling the layers back to see what it took to get to this process. And like I said in the episode with Marissa, there really are like three main components, I think, that are a big part of getting to where you are and achieving excellence. It's about believing in fate, right? Sometimes things just happen the way they're supposed to. We really have no control over that. But knowing that somehow, some way things come together, having faith both in yourself, knowing that others have faith in you, having faith in something outside of yourself, and this idea of agency, which I think is a big part of our work, is helping people to feel like they have agency and they have some role in what happens in their lives, where they can build skills, they can better understand themselves, they could understand their emotions and how that plays a role in their life, and really figure out what goals you want to work toward and what that process is going to be like.
We're going to really try to identify themes that cut across the stories shared by the guests. We do think that there are themes along the way, and we're also going to highlight the insights and wisdom that came from each individual guest. And overall, we want this episode to acknowledge our guests and what they brought to the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast, and also to relate it to the work that we do with individuals in our practice every day. So, Lex, you're an educator, right? And in my own way, I'm an educator too, as a professor. And, education is huge. They always say knowledge is power. And, one of the themes I really felt came up a lot in all of the guests in sharing their story was the importance of learning. And your job basically is to help people to learn.
I had a client yesterday who said, you literally teach people how they learn best. That's literally what you do. That's awesome. And it is awesome. And, knowledge is power, but I think wisdom helps us to transcend that knowledge into more purposeful practice, which I think is really incredible, which is a lot of what our guests were so articulate in sharing on the season's episodes.
Mm-hmm. And what came up in their stories is that everybody had their own version of learning that was meaningful to them. You can think of finding that passion really opens up this desire to learn. Not everybody's going to be in a classroom and just absolutely love to learn what they're being taught, whether it's math or history or English, whatever, social studies, whatever topic that may be discussed to them. But, it's amazing when people can, that's what you try to help your students to do, is to engage in the material. That's really, fundamentally what helps people to learn the best is when they're truly engaged in it. That's one of your UDL principles that you hold true to. And the research backs that up too. So, one of the biggest themes that I really found really amazing, and, this applies to us too in our own journeys, is just, when you're motivated by something, you really truly care about it, you're going to do everything you want, everything you can to learn about that, because it's going to be inspiring to you. And it might be different from what other people may expect of you. Like maybe, you're not top of the class academically, but, like Joe P said, he picked up his guitar. He was an expert learner in the guitar. He wasn't necessarily that in the classroom. And I think, he did say he has some regrets about like not, fully engaging in his academics like he could have. But he was finding more meaning in the guitar and learning about that. And that's just a different type of learning. It's not like it's better or worse than other type of learning that could happen in the classroom.
Yeah, I think, like you're saying, leaning into the process of learning was such a big theme across all the episodes we recorded for season 2. And, it's also a theme in the work that we do every day, whether it's your clients learning about who they are, my clients learning how to learn well and navigate life with using skills in different ways in the classroom or outside of it. And I think that, one of the big parts of this is so many of our guests mentioned that they got in touch with what they were really good at. They recognized their strengths and skills and passions, but they needed to do more with it than just show up with it. And I think this is a big piece that gets missed. And this has been a common theme also, talking about what we see in the media at this day and age, that we often see the outcome more than the process. And, just having a natural skill set often isn't enough. And we need to deepen that understanding, again, going from just learning or using skills to transcend it more into like, the semantically, it's that thing I said before about wisdom, but the wisdom becomes the practice. It becomes the integration of whatever you are focusing on to be able to do, whether it is an instrument or, a sport or in acting or in business or in life in general. Our natural abilities and skills can only take us so far. So we really need to lean into learning and understand what that process is to better integrate into whatever we choose to do. Because even us in our work, I have a quote on my desk still to this day, and I said it in season 1. It says, I'm still learning. We're all still learning. And one of the greatest Buddhist philosophies that I believe in is that there's a sense of ignorance, that we don't know what we don't know a lot of times. And we're always still learning. There's this beautiful curiosity in life, and I think it's what makes us human, to be able to explore and understand what's possible. And talking to people and having the opportunity like we do every day and here on the podcast to talk to people and hear their stories, I think is a great process for us in learning too.
Definitely. I mean, every moment is a different moment, right? And who you are now is going to be different in some ways than who you are a year from now, 2 years from now, a decade from now. We're always evolving and growing, and we have new experiences that, in some ways shapes us to be a little bit different as we go. So to be open to learning about ourselves and what we're doing is great. And to be humble about that, right? That's humility. And I did hear a lot of that humility that there is always something more to learn and to seek that out. And like I said, when you're inspired, it's like you want to seek that out. Jelani talked about he's a Broadway star. Like, the dude's doing amazing things. And
by the way, just a little plug for Jelani right now. In June 2023, he just stepped onto the set and stage of Back to the Future in his new role there, which is really exciting.
Yeah, and it seems like he just loves, stepping into these roles. But, he talked about always looking to people above him from the beginning, and even now, he doesn't have to do that, but he's always looking for people who have come before him, who have more of an expertise in some area or have some wisdom to gain. And he sought that out, and he always felt like that was part of his growth. Like, find someone else who knows more than him or who he can kind of see or model from to get better. And he did that since high school. And he was a late bloomer too. He was not acting early on in his life. He was a very late bloomer. But he didn't let that hold him back. And Marissa, talked about this too. In some ways, she's a late bloomer because college was there. Your college was not focused on, it wasn't known for like media relations. It was like you guys had to create your own.
I don't think we had a broadcast program there at all. There was a communications program, which I started in, and, it didn't exist. We had to create it.
You created your own TV station. Marissa you guys were green with this. You both were green to this. And Marissa, I think what I found a theme for her too is she leaned into just learning and being excited about it and taking opportunities to get better. And that excitement, I'm going to say this, is when you're trying something new, it's scary.
Oh, totally.
And I think, in sports psychology world, we try to sometimes reframe things being scary to things being exciting, or being, changing the interpretation of what you're feeling can help sometimes. And I felt that from Jelani, from Marissa, and from others. When you're really inspired to learn and to grow, that can make those nerves and those butterflies not get in the way of your process, because it's hard to jump into something new.
Yeah. And as I frequently say, and listeners of the podcast know that, oftentimes these frightening, uncertain times can bring about the greatest changes, even though it's really challenging to get into it. And a lot of the work that I do, thinking about executive function skills, right? To be able to inhibit, to pause and kind of check yourself and say, okay, what's happening for me in my environment, around me, with what I have available to me, but also inside, right? From an emotional aspect and perspective, what's coming up for me that I need to pay attention to, because it might be a signal in some way to tell me something needs to shift or change or adapt. And then the working memory skills, when you're learning new things, you're taking in so much information and you need to do something with it right away. Think about everybody that we interviewed. Jelani on the spot, sometimes he has to learn a line or a song in a few minutes and then practice it and audition it. Thinking about Marissa being out in the field, Mia, when she steps foot on the ice, you have to adapt to the new changes that are happening on a team, within the team, with the other team that you're performing against. Every single person here, that we talked about and talked with in season 2, it's about being open to what's happening and taking in information. And sometimes, especially from learning new information and learning how to adapt and change, it's a process. It doesn't always just come online right away, especially, as you say, if there is some anxiety or stress around it, because that's going to also weaken the critical executive function skills that allow for us to do deep, hard, complex tasks. Not to mention, cognitive flexibility, which often comes online a little bit later in life, because we need to have a lot of experiences and know that there's different paths we can take to even know to make a shift or change. We can end up in a rigid place because all we know is what we've tried. And if it doesn't work, it might seem hopeless. Like, oh, well, I guess I'm not good at that. I tried it. I thought I was good. Didn't go the way I planned. So therefore I need to give up or change my path. Versus, how can I adapt, shift, or pivot a little to see if we can make some improvements and find more purpose in that which we're doing?
Totally. And that's it's a plug for therapy, but therapy is a lot about just learning about yourself. I just had a session with someone who, was saying like, I never really knew why I was doing this or why I had this pattern. We got to such a good deep insight in the session that she's like, oh, it totally makes sense in a way that I didn't really totally understand in a deeper way. And to your point about adapting, that takes self-awareness. And it's not just learning your craft. Like, I think, one of the the major themes of this podcast too is like learning is not just about something, a skill. It's also about learning about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you do in your work, helping learners to understand how they learn best. It's in my work and helping people reflect on themselves. And I'm going to add a piece to this, that it's also the people around you. That was another theme from our interviewees. They had people to support them that either really believed in them, gave them autonomy to take risks and to try new things and to feel safe to do that. Because to have that, if you're in the classroom, think back to when you're a kid, you have a teacher that you trust and know that they care about you, and they're going to create an atmosphere conducive to learning. And this is also what therapy
Ideally, yeah.
Ideally, right. And this is also what therapy is. Let me create a context in which you can be vulnerable and just open up to an honest truth of like yourself and how things happen. By doing so, you can learn. You can learn a lot of things in that type of context. So,
and I'm going to bring it back to learning for a minute before we go on to that next theme of connection and community. And I really want to double back into this because you, me, and our friend and colleague Luis Perez, we just did a conference presentation about trauma-informed teaching and learning. And I want to bring this up because for our listeners who might have had a negative experience with learning in the past, or those who maybe have tried something and failed or felt like it was a failure to them in that moment, that it's often not an all or nothing experience with learning, right? Oftentimes there's gradations and levels and steps. And parts of that is really the process of learning. You learn what works and what doesn't. And, thinking about experiences that could have been really detrimental, brought about a lot of stress and distress in a moment, especially if you're in a learning environment that is not set up or conducive to learning for what works best for you. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, doesn't mean that we can't also create or co-create these spaces, these opportunities, these contexts for ourselves, or advocate for what we need in these different learning environments. And I say learning environments broadly. It could be, from preschool all the way up to high school, in your, college, undergraduate,
your workplace
situations, and workplace. Exactly. That was my point that I was getting to. Even in our household, right? Sometimes different contexts and situations change that we need to change the way we do chores, right? Maybe we need to redistribute the efforts in different ways, or come up with a different system, or come up with a different plan or way that we balance out efforts for the people who contribute. There's all different things that are constantly shifting and changing. And again, going back to this advocacy agency piece, like we can play a role in what happens. And oftentimes when it feels difficult, when it feels challenging, when it feels scary, it's really easy to shut down and be like, nope, I don't want to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the people we brought on this season to interview, every single one of them had at least one situation that they shared with us where they could have said, no, this is too hard.
Mm-hmm.
This is too scary. I don't want to put myself out there, be vulnerable, try to jump without a net, and maybe fall flat on my face. And oftentimes, most of them have shared, or they've shared with us personally off air, that there were times where, it was really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And they did get stuck for a little while. And they had to adapt and shift and change to get back on a path or create a new path to lead them towards where they were heading and what they were able to share with us and what that process looked like.
Yeah, and if you get too fixated on the outcome or the future or some ideal, this is the perfectionism episode, then you can lose touch with trusting in the process of what's happening, and it could feel like a catastrophe. That's kind of the CBT term, catastrophizing.
Yeah.
And that's that can create anxiety, and anxiety is an emotion that can make people narrow-minded. It's just the way that anxiety does, because anxiety, you see a threat, like, back in the day, you see like a lion, you want your focus to only focus on the lion and narrow your focus on one thing. And different threats happen in different ways to different people, depending on what they perceive a threat is. So you can get really fixated in that way. And, and go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, and, a lion in these days and age might be a really difficult test or a job interview,
Mm-hmm.
or, somebody that you had an argument with who you now need to confront and talk to in a reasonable way. Or it could be, just somebody makes a comment on your social media post that feels uncomfortable. Those can all feel like threats. It can be a lot of different things. It's not, we don't live, most of us, in a bucolic and wilderness way where we're facing really big, scary animals every day, that's the only threat we need to protect ourselves from. There's so many threats that can trigger a response that can be stressful or sometimes traumatic.
And so and part of the process is, learning from the experience and trying to figure out how to be flexible to adjust and to make adjustments. So let's take Jelani's example. He talked about when he was on auditions, and he's like, could you believe, you have like 15, I don't know how long it was, like very short period of time to just sing something or to perform or to act. And they're judging you. They want to know if they want to hire you or not for the role and to cast you. And so, he said very bluntly that he had to learn it's not personal as much as it feels it is. In so many words, he said, they may not be looking for you now, but they may be looking for you in the future. And it may be something you don't even know that they're looking for. And the key, this is his reframe that really was great. And, a lot of therapy sometimes is reframing, reinterpreting to be resilient. And as he said, the most important thing is they don't want me to be something I'm not. They want to see the full me. And my job is to be the full Jelani that I can be when I'm showing up. And whatever happens. I'll find the right role for myself as time goes on.
Yeah. And Kevin talked about this when he was a youth baseball pitcher and got cut from the team at 11, 12 years old and had to figure out what else to do with his spring. And he didn't even know that he was going to become a tennis player until he had that opportunity, because the thing he expected didn't work out the way he wanted it to. And one of my favorite new things to say to clients now in my sessions comes from Ted Lasso, actually, in early season, where he says, be a goldfish, right? Be a goldfish and forget the things that don't always work out the way you want them to. Because we overly, like you're saying, we overly fixate and remember the things that don't work. And in fact, that's not often, for some people it is motivating, but for many people it's not. And it gets us so stuck in the hardness and the difficulties and the challenges, instead of being like, oh, well, I'm still floating. I'm still swimming. What am I going to do now? Right? Be that goldfish and have that quick opportunity to forget the stuff that doesn't go well, because if we keep harping on it, it's going to get in our way every time.
Yeah, I remember talking to someone in therapy, and someone was very hard on himself and would really kind of berate himself and say such negative things when things were not going well, when he made a mistake or did something he regretted. And, what came out of me in this moment was, wait, reflection has a purpose. There's a function to reflecting on the past. It's to learn from it. So I said, did you learn from it? And he said, yeah, I definitely have learned from it. I'm going to try to, use what I've learned in the future. Okay. Your reflection has done its job. Sure, you're going to need reminders along the way. We all need reminders. In some ways, this is what the podcast is about. It's like sometimes we just need reminders about things. We may not be saying things that other people haven't said before, but this is, a way to kind of create a context to have reminders for what we all need. And I said to him, okay, your reflection has done its job. You don't want to overdo something. If you're going to keep reflecting on this and berating yourself, it's lost its purpose.
Great point.
Now it's time to move on.
Yeah. Goldfish mindset. And I could talk about learning, as you know, forever. I'm going to share one more story. It's a personal story about my path in learning. And then we'll pivot to the next theme that came up. But, I think this is an important point to make. And I share this often with clients that I work with, that, oftentimes they'll look at me and be like, oh, you're so intelligent and smart and this and that. I can't believe all that you're doing. And I have to remind them about my journey too, right? Because when I was growing up, there were a lot of things that came naturally, but I didn't always put my fullest effort into everything I did either. I said in one of the last episodes that, I really didn't feel inspired to read for reading's sake until I was much older. I would read a lot, but I didn't, choose that path for myself until I was a little bit older. And when I did, people who know me know I have this huge library now of books that I love to dive into and enjoy.
I didn't start reading really passionately reading until college when I was coaching. It was because of coaching that I was like, wow, I really am interested in this. Let me read as much as I can about it.
Right. And sometimes when you choose something you want to learn more about, that's when you dive deeper into it versus somebody else telling you to do it. And we totally get that. And a lot of the younger people we work with are like, well, I don't want to do this because I was told to do it. But there's skills that get developed in doing things that maybe you don't love to do, yes, but you have to do, right? There's a balance there that needs to be achieved. And
adults are in our lives for a reason.
Well,
they have perspective to remind us of what we need to do sometimes.
Yeah. Absolutely true. Because our prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed until much later in life. But, Joe really did a nice job reflecting on that experience too. And he even said, if I could go back to school and do it differently, I probably would. But for me, I took a little different path. There were so many things that happened to me when I was in high school, when I was a teenager. We lost a lot of people that were very close to us. There was a lot of mourning and change that happened at a very critical point in my life that I know definitely impacted my academic portion of my life. And I see it every day in the kids I work with, right, that are young people that are going through a lot of stuff. And often that's why they need me at that point in their life to help support them, to bring them up and teach them about, when my emotions get high, when stuff is going on I can't control, how do I zero in on these skills that are going to help carry me forward? And, I want to just point this out because a lot of my clients, they see the schools I graduated from, right? The end results, but they might not know that my first year out of high school. And by the way, when I was in high school, when the academic stuff maybe wasn't the best that it could be, and I'm going to say that because my mom and dad will hold me to that, that I didn't always do my best during those tough times, that other stuff was going on that I couldn't control. But I really leaned into the stuff I was good at that time, right? I was a big part of student government, a lot of volunteer organizations, a lot of helping the community. I was fortunate to write for the newspaper in the sports section to really explore the passions and the things I loved a lot. So like Joe was saying, even if you're not learning what you're being told to learn in the way people are telling you to learn it, there's still opportunities to learn and develop your skills. And I think that's what I did. And I want to share that for people who might be going through things that they don't have control over, especially young people, because they don't have the experiences over the course of life, like we talked about with Marissa, that they might not have as many data points, that there's going to be ups and downs. So when the things feel difficult and challenging, that there's other ways to channel your energies to be able to get you through while still building skills that translate into the academic areas, if that's what you choose. But with that, my first year out of high school, I ended up going to it was a state university in New Jersey. It was close by to where we lived. And I lived home for a year until I figured out really what I wanted to do. And I would say it's probably the best thing I ever did. So I'm a huge advocate of students taking a gap year or maybe going to community college or a more local university to figure out really who they are and what they want to do. I was so fortunate I had the opportunity to literally study everything. I think I took intro to law classes, accounting classes. I dove deeply into broadcast journalism because that was my passion then. And I got to explore and visit a lot of my friends who were at different schools too. And then I got to study abroad that summer afterwards. And it was on a much cheaper opportunity than it would have been if I pursued that through where I ended up at Loyola College in Maryland, Loyola University. But I just want to share that because sometimes the path isn't laid out exactly the way others might be experiencing it or what you think you're supposed to be doing. There's always going to be a different path, a different option that might fit you better. And it really is not about thinking one size fits all. This is the way the trajectory of people's lives in general go, whether you're in the US or you're in a country in Europe or Africa, Australia, or Asia, wherever you are. It's not about just thinking, I have to do what everybody else is doing. It's really about doing that deep work and reflection and who am I as a learner? Is this the right time for me to be pursuing this? Is this a passion and purpose that I feel committed to and engaged to? And how do I map that out? And sometimes you need the support of somebody like you and I, or a close mentor or coach or friend, or another adult that's a positive influence in your life, or a family member. But, there's really no shame in that, is my point in saying all this.
Yeah, it's not linear. And all those experiences, eventually lead you to be who you are as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
And, they don't have to be considered something bad. Like, we're always making judgments, what's good, what's bad. And sometimes things just are what they are. It's part of your journey. So, embrace make meaning out of it the way you want to. After high school, I went to the same university you talked about, local state university, and started coaching. I had a great opportunity. I was very blessed to have that. Coaching in the inner city, and I had these experiences that I think I just needed to have at that time in my life. I'm thankful to my family for the opportunity, and also mom to she always encouraged boldness in us.
Yeah.
Who was I? I showed up with the team, and we would go to different schools, and I looked so young. I was always short, looked young when I was younger. And
Yeah.
I remember another coach, I introduced myself to the other coach at one of the schools. I'm like, "How you doing, coach? Nice to see you. Excited for the game today." And the other coach, he was so much older than me. He looks at me and he goes, "How you doing? Where's your coach?" I'm like, "That's me."
That's right.
But I think I needed experiences like this to grow and to develop, and I had to be vulnerable. I had to really believe in myself, and I think we call her Mama Dukes. She really inspired us to believe and to be courageous and to be bold, and that I mentioned this when we talked to Kevin about coaching, but stuff I was doing then informs what I do now as a psychologist. I was experiencing. Stuff was coming out of me about leadership, about getting to know people, building really good relationships. I remember at the end of the season, writing up a whole, feedback to the players individually about hey, here's what I learned about you. Here's things you can work on. And I'm doing stuff now. I'm doing the same thing now when I do assessments with people. I'm trying to learn about them and give them feedback in a positive and encouraging way. Joe P said this too sometimes in our interview with Joe P. He said, stuff I was doing back then when I was younger, I'm still doing now.
Yeah.
So, all this is to say, when you're parenting, it's hard to really understand what a child needs when you're parenting. We talked about that too. So if you can see glimpses of who your child is, it's good to understand what might that mean about them and their personality, about what they might do as they get older. And embrace that rather than feeling they have to go do this because, that's an expectation of society or some other cultural norm or something that hey, try to understand who they are.
Yeah, I'm going to add a caveat there that just because somebody picks up a guitar or a violin or a piano and says, "Oh, this is cool," doesn't mean they need to be committed to 2 years of lessons intensely. But I think, like you're saying, that it's about having that conversation, right? And showing up for them. If you have a student who says, "I think I really love music," bring them to a concert. Introduce them to somebody that's been doing this for a long time. Play them Joe P's episode, right? And hear about what it takes to commit to becoming, the best at what you do, or that level, to work at a higher level, because it does take a lot of commitment and sacrifice. And it's not always an easy path because there's going to be ups and downs. I was just talking to one of our 20-something-year-old cousins the other day about, she's a year out of college and working a couple different jobs trying to find her path. And she said, "Lexi, I'm not really saving any money right now. This is really difficult." And I had to remind her, I know that feeling. We used to joke when we were in grad school, I skipped a whole bunch of years. We'll come back to it, I'm sure. But when we were in grad school, we had to share a really small space together our first year to live in Boston because it was very expensive. And we joked it was like camp grad school because it's almost like we were on bunk beds trying to just make it work. And sometimes you got to get scrappy and you got to figure out what it's going to take to make it work. But, to your point, Jared, you might have been doing a lot of the same things back then as you're doing now. And like I said, that's the natural talent and gift in who you are. But by no means does that mean you were at the same skill level then as you are now, because you put so much effort and so much training into building and honing those skills, right? And huge dedication, lots of sacrifice on every aspect of your life, probably, to be able to improve that which came naturally to you, that it had to be something that was developed over time to get to a point that now, you and I feel comfortable having these conversations on the podcast to share with others in this way.
Yeah. I mean, I remember Mia saying this. We echoed this a few times. Said, Mia, like, who are the athletes that really go far? Are they the ones that are kind of just going through the motions or feel like they're forced to be there? Or they're the ones that really are excited about the sport and they just love it and they're going to go out and play it because they love it? They would be out there like she was doing drills, playing the sport, doing the sport without, even if they weren't told to, because they're so immersed in it and engaged in it. Joe P said the same thing. He's like, even now he's got a big following and he's like, I would be doing this if there was no following.
Yeah.
He's like, if I was the only person left on earth, I would be doing the same thing. So, to your point, and I felt this way, like, when I jumped into this career, I was just so excited to learn and to grow. And like, I was doing it because I wanted to do it. I didn't feel forced to do it. I felt like it was a passion and I felt like it, like you said, it clicked with my strengths.
Yeah.
And to know that like there's at least something there that's a good foundation. I think number one, it's to support people in your life. Having to support people, but also knowing that your strengths. Peter Savas said this. He's very successful in running companies, and he's trying to do a lot of good right now and trying to address Parkinson's disease in his company. And it's a very meaningful thing to him and really drives him. But he was saying, back when he was younger, that like he had to get feedback about things he may not have been naturally good at, and he was told to shift in a different direction, and that really helped him. It doesn't mean that someone tells you exactly you have to do this. Like, sometimes I've gotten advice sometimes that didn't fit exactly what I needed for myself, and that's okay.
Or like Jelani's mom said, just not feeling it.
Just not feeling it. No. Yeah, that's it though. You need honest feedback, but it's compassionate, inspiring feedback, and it's not just shooting your dreams down. It's like, let's try to navigate this together. So, and when you have that and you really care, like, you're all in, but it's an engaging thing. It doesn't mean it's easy. Like, it's definitely not easy, right. But that element, and remember I asked Mia, she said, yep, those are the ones who really, really, get much further. Otherwise you can really get burnt out.
Yeah. And, I hear people using the term ego in a kind of negative way, but ego is really just like your identity, yourself that you put forth. And I think that sometimes we get really like stuck on an ego, which could make it a negative connotation in how we show up in a way. Mm-hmm. But I think that there needs to be like a little stripped down version of ego to tap into humility, to be open and vulnerable to taking feedback and making changes and adapting and adjusting to whatever the context might be. I was talking to a parent earlier who, is going through a tough time trying to adapt to a child who was adopted. And, they're working so hard and doing so much through so much love that she's sharing for her daughter. And I said, parenting is so difficult because even when you figure out the formula that works well in a moment, the next day or the next week, you might need to come up with something different. Just because the context changes, something might come up from the past that you don't even recognize or know or can anticipate. And all of this is constantly shifting and changing, as it is in life in general. And I think we need to be open to the process of, taking in information, reaching out for support, tapping into resources that are available, and really honestly recognizing that we're all human, just doing the best that we can. But to your point of the second theme that really was a resounding theme across everybody we talked to this season was thinking about this idea of community and connection and support. And we touched upon this a little bit already, so we won't go too far into it. But, we mentioned mom, dad, our cousins, aunts, uncles, friends and family across the board. We might not see or talk to them all the time, but we feel the love and the support, and we know that they're out there cheering in some way, in their own way. And it might not look the same every single time, might not feel the same. And it might be very distant, but it's there. And the fact that we can trust in the fact that there are people that believe in us, and you and I both, especially here in Boston, I feel so grateful that we've developed a community here since we started grad school here in Boston. We're not from Boston originally. We're from New Jersey, as you've heard over the episodes. But, I feel so lucky to have found a community of colleagues, mentors, and friends who have just embraced me and the work that I do in such a beautiful way. And I'm so grateful for that. And that's what inspires me and keeps me going, especially in the work that we do, that we're able to enter people's lives, usually when it's a really tough time for them, and to be able to support them in the way that fulfills an aspect of their life and empowers them to do something different and be better. And to that point, when I was in college, I shifted from communications to education, as most of you probably can imagine, as I'm an educator by trade. And I will never forget sitting in a class one day, and one of my very good friends to this day, Julia, looked at me and said, "Lex, you're going to be a great teacher, but that's not all you're going to do. There's something else that you're going to do in your life, something that has to do with like psychology or mental health and also education at the same time." And I looked at her like, I don't know what that's going to be, but I feel that too. And I'll never forget going home from that class that day, and I wrote out like a 5-year plan of what I thought I wanted to do and what I wanted it to look like. And to be quite honest, I had never seen anything like it before. Like, I didn't know of a person who did the work that I currently do now back then. And somehow I just drew up all the characteristics of it. It's almost like, what we do in our work in a therapeutic capacity of like journaling, putting it out there, getting clear about what you're looking to be and looking to do, and mapping that out. So, for anybody out there listening, trying to think of how they want to show up next, take that opportunity to press pause and just write down, what do you want it to look like? And if you even approximate that, it's amazing, because I pinch myself all the time because I feel so grateful and blessed to be able to do the work that I do every day, and to be able to do so many different facets and aspects of the work I do in the educational realm, and to be able to blend it with the work you do in the mental health realm, and to help people on all these different levels. It's absolutely miraculous, and it's nothing I could have ever dreamed of. Again, I wanted to be a sportscaster when I was in high school. Who would have known?
Yeah, we need, you never know how things are going to progress. Like you said, like you just kind of feel like this makes sense right now, and you get some inspiration, like your friend gave you some inspiration because she saw something inside of you. Jelani said that too, like his choir teacher is like, no, you got to get into theater. And he said very specifically, like she pushed him in that direction, and he was uncertain about it, but she saw something in him that led him there. When I was in grad school, we had kind of a joint program between the School of Education and School of Medicine, and one of the professors at the School of Medicine, there's actually 2 of them. At the time, I was so interested in the brain. Like, there was brain science was just like blowing up. It was like 2008, 2009. And like all the 2000s, like this brain science was like all over the place. I'm like, what? This stuff is so cool, interesting. And I actually applied to go into the field of just becoming
neuroscientist.
Yeah, neuroscientist. And I actually got accepted to the program. And I never forget this. 2 of the professors, they essentially, in so many words, said, you're such a people person. You're a therapist. Like, they saw something in me that when you're growing and you're going through training and stuff, you have no context. You don't have like people who we've talked to before in the field, like you have no idea what to expect. Everything's brand new. And for them to have that perspective and then share that with me, I changed my course. I mean, it came with a lot of reflection and talking with people close to me as well, but that definitely helped. Someone who's been through the field, who knows the field, is like, no, like you have something natural. Like this is, they didn't tell me I had to choose it, but I definitely ended up choosing this direction rather than becoming a neuroscientist. Kind of a brain scientist, because, like you said, like someone can see something inside of you that, you don't realize it yourself, because sometimes we got to rely on other people's perspective.
Yeah. And I think naturally curious people, which, you and I definitely are, but so are so many of the people we work with. I think that actually causes a lot of confusion for them. That makes things feel uncomfortable because they like so many different things and they're not sure what to do with it. But, you didn't formally, properly get trained to be a neuroscientist, but, you and I both have incorporated so much neuroscience in our own way of learning. You through doing your postdoctoral work at MGH to do neuropsychological evaluations, and me by really diving deeply into the neuroscience side of education and learning. It wasn't something I at least formally trained in, but it's something that I've really developed an expertise in because it's something I cared about. And that's the other part of this too, going back to learning. I knew I was going to do it. Going back to learning again as a theme that you don't have to just do a formal program to learn a lot about something that is going to benefit you or the work you do in the future. And that's another theme too. Even thinking about Peter talking about, I thought I was going to become a scientist, but I was really good at the business side of it. And I was able to blend those pieces together, and it's a really beautiful thing.
And Rosie, right?
Yeah.
So Rosie, what a great story, right? And she was talking about her journey of, that led her to get back to her roots of what she really loved. She kind of went into the business world of things and kind of the corporate route of doing different things. But she's like, you know what? I really love the face-to-face with people. And she opened up her own business and she had a few goes at it and did great with it each time. But in her later stages, she's like, it's all going to be back to the basics of what really brings me joy and fulfillment. And she got back to that. And that was very meaningful to her because she was being true to herself. So much of life is like, what's most true to me? And it takes time to figure that out. And we got to go through experiences to make sense of it. But these stories are powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And more to come. And, we touched upon this a little bit, but I just want to dive deeply because I know that so many people we talked to in season 2 brought up this adaptability and flexibility piece of things. And like I said, from a neurodevelopmental perspective of it all, this is something that does take time to come online. And you can think about it this way that, young kids might not be able to recognize all the different breeds in dogs, right? But they might know that when they see a dog, it's a dog, but they might not know all the different names and characteristics of them. It's the same thing as we get older in life, that sometimes we don't have as many experiences to know all the possibilities of what might happen, that it makes it more difficult to be cognitively flexible, to see more than just the path that's right in front of you. So to be adaptable, to be able to be flexible, to pivot and shift psychologically, cognitively, it takes a lot of effort sometimes as those cognitive skills are coming online. And again, as I constantly am saying, all of this is so vulnerable and influenced by our emotion that if we get dysregulated or overly emotional in one direction or another, it can also hinder our ability to flex and change. I mean, even thinking about like if you have a plan of you're really excited about doing something and then all of a sudden it doesn't work out the way you want to, it might be really difficult for you to shift your plan or your approach.
Yeah, life is so interesting because we all want control, and control reduces anxiety. But sometimes we have to learn how to let go of needing control in certain ways, and also learn how we can gain control in other ways. And that's like a dynamic thing. That's what a lot of therapy is about. It's like, how do you find things that you can control, or it makes sense to control, and pull back on the things that you can or maybe not need to. And that's all about the process. And it takes time to understand that.
Yeah, and it was really cool to hear people's stories in reflecting on, maybe I was a little more rigid when I was younger, but I'm glad I gave myself the space, the time, the opportunity to sit with it or to make a change, because it actually ultimately brought me to where I am today that feels more fulfilling than it would have been before.
Yeah. And it's good to have those foundations that keep us steady. You talked about the boat metaphor from Scott Barry Kaufman. And we talked about this in the happiness episode, is having that foundation, whatever it is. It could be one person that you can kind of lean on emotionally. It could be family. Rosie talked a lot about family and how meaningful family was to her. is to her. And, to have that to keep you steady when the waves are crashing and when the storms come. And it could be anything. It could be that you just kind of stick to your routines. It could be that, you have meaning in your life, or you have sort of, some rituals that kind of keep you grounded. Because life is it's scary when things are confusing or uncertain. And, we all need something to hold on to. And the hope is that it's a healthy thing, right? We talked about this in the past, people can develop unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with things like this. And the hope is that you learn that, those are just coping mechanisms. These things don't define who I am, whether it's substance use or different kind of maladaptive habits that people can fall into, that those are, if you can understand them as coping mechanisms, you don't have to identify with them as much, and you can replace them with something healthier. And so, the main point here is, finding healthy versions of your foundation is a great part of growing and getting through life. And it takes time to figure out what that will be for you.
I was reflecting on this recently. I don't know if I even said this out loud, but I was reflecting on how a lot of people think, looks or monetary successes or fame or achievement is really what's like the most sexy and attractive in a person. I actually think having those routines that ground you is like the most attractive thing that anybody can have or do. Is like, you know who you are, you know what you need, you know what's helpful, and you do it not because somebody tells you to, but because it makes you feel good.
Totally, Lex. And anybody I work with who has social anxiety, I ask them this one question. Do you admire the person who's extremely popular and people just fawn over them because they're like a celebrity or because they're so cool? Or do you admire someone who is comfortable in their own skin? And more times than not, they'll say, I admire the person who's comfortable in their own skin. That takes time to develop in all of ourselves. We're all striving for that. That takes time. But what a great ideal to strive for. Doesn't mean you always have to be that way, but I think, when you can get to that, you feel more grounded for sure. And that takes time to understand. It also helps you to understand who truly appreciates you as a person, right? If people like you because of some sort of act that you're putting on or that you're trying to impress them, how do you know that you have a real relationship, or they're just like you for some version of yourself that you're presenting to them? So, that's grounding to know that you really have relationships. That's what the happiness episode is about in a lot of ways is, cultivating, genuine relationships is a big part of happiness.
And reminding yourself that there is no such thing as perfect, right? The trajectory in life, and if we're thinking about some outcome as being excellent for whatever we're aiming to excel at, it's always going to be an up and down. It's more like rolling hills versus like steep peaks that we go up and down. And that actually helps us from, a more of a hormonal aspect too, if we were to get into the biology of it, that it helps to keep our cortisol's levels a little bit more steady, and it helps us to feel good. Not necessarily just be happy, but feel content, feel good, feel like we're doing what we're supposed to be doing, which I think is where we can find excellence in life.
Totally. So all this to say, Lex, we had a great season 2. I mean, like the individuals we brought on, they're just wonderful people, first and foremost. As Mia said, the elite hockey player, she said at the very end, remember, all the athletes out there, you're also human, and you're not just an athlete. And we always talk about that because, that's what life is. We see people for who they are, not just some outward outcome that we're talking about. So it's been such a great season 2. And again, I thank you, Alexis, because you convinced me to do this. I did not want to do this in the beginning. I was like, what? We're going to do a podcast? Oh my God, no. And as you do, you pull me out of my comfort zone. But most importantly, we're doing this for the right reasons. We're doing this because we truly care about sharing stuff. We enjoy sharing. That's part of our personality, and we feel like we have so much experience and training and knowledge that, maybe 1 or 2 people or a lot of people benefit from this in some ways. Sometimes we just need reminders. Sometimes you can be inspired by something. You can learn something new. But, it's like when I write songs, like I have to always remind myself, I'm doing this for myself. If one person likes the song, cool. That's great. That's enough for me. I'm doing I try to do things for the right reasons, and I appreciate you bringing me onto this. It's been so fun, and it's been cool for us to have this experience together.
Yeah, it's very cool. How lucky are we to be able to do this together and to have this great studio now that we've found to help us in this process. But
Cyber Sound Studios, Boston, Newbury Street.
There we go.
Amazing studio, amazing people.
Incredible. It feels very comfortable, and it's so wonderful, and they're so helpful and professional on every level. But I have to also say that, well, two things. One, I'm going to say is a little bit of a caution, because I think in all the stories we heard both the high points and the low points of everybody who shared what it took to get to where they are today. And one of the things I just want to share to the audience and the world at large, I hope, is that whatever you see people presenting in a moment, there might be, an ocean of other experiences and other struggles that might be going on behind the scenes that you might have no idea these people are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
It's never just one thing. There's so many things that are often connected, and there's so much that goes into the complexity of humanity and life. And I just want to share that if we can all just be a little more empathetic to the fact that we are all going through a lot, even when it doesn't look that way, even when we are experiencing joy and purpose and happiness, that there might be so much more going on. And if we can even share 1 ounce of empathy with other people that we pass by, that we interact with, that we have the opportunity to teach, mentor, guide, or, have a therapeutic alliance and relationship with, whatever it might be, whatever the context is, just remember that there's usually something more going on in the background.
Yeah. And we can reflect on our own stuff that we've been through, and it helps you empathize more with other people. And like we said with Joe P, food and music brings people together, people who are different than each other. And, I'm talking to a high school student the other day, and just the wisdom of a high school student sometimes just amazes me, talking about how you can have differences with people, but you can also remind yourself that you have a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And sometimes the relationship supersedes the differences that you have with each other.
For sure.
Whether it's opinions or, different things that you disagree on. And also that you might agree on other things that you may dismiss in the midst of an argument about who's right or wrong. So, as much as we can, arguments and debates are good and all that, because they can move towards some evolution of something positive. But at the same time, bring people together who are different could be a beautiful thing as well. This is a bit of a tangent here, but
no, I think it's good. And we brought up this idea of expansion, and I think that's it. We expand and grow ourselves and our souls, our wisdom, by having these conversations with people of diverse backgrounds and experiences and interests and passions, and perspectives. And that's how we grow ourselves. And this is, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to do this podcast, is because we get to have these conversations offline with these really interesting people, both in our work and from colleagues that we meet over our time and training and in the work that we do. It's incredible. And I think the more we can open ourselves up to being open, being curious, being well, the more we can evolve as humanity. And, I'm grateful for Mama Dukes, who sent us an email last week and said, guys, I'm so proud of you for doing this podcast. It's almost like you're doing preventative therapy for people to kind of think about things that maybe they've never thought about before, hear different experiences that others haven't heard about, and get a little glimpse into the work that you both do, to know that there might be other options to help support them if they need it. And I thought that really encapsulates what we're doing here. And glad you got out of your comfort zone. Took a lot of convincing, but I think it's a beautiful thing, and we're looking forward to the next season. We've got incredible guests lined up already, and some really important topics we can't wait to dive into. So thanks for following along. Thanks for being a part of our family. If you're listening, you are in our hearts, in our worlds, and we're really grateful for that.
Thanks for tuning in to the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. Please remember that this is a podcast intended to educate and share ideas, but it is not a substitute for professional care that may be beneficial to you at different points of your life. If you are in need of support, please contact your primary care physician, local hospital, educational institution, or support staff at your place of employment to seek out referrals for what may be most helpful for you. Ideas shared here have been shaped by many years of training, incredible mentors, research, theory, evidence-based practices, and our work with individuals over the years, but it's not intended to represent opinions of those we work with or who we are affiliated with. The ReidConnect-Ed Podcast is hosted by siblings Alexis Reid and Dr. Gerald Reid. Original music is written and recorded by Gerald Reid. Editing and recording was done by Cybersound Studios. If you want to follow along on this journey with us, the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks each season. So please subscribe for updates and notifications. Feel free to also follow us on Instagram at ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. That's ReidConnect-Ed Podcast, and Twitter at ReidConnect-Ed. We are grateful for you joining us and look forward to future episodes. In the meanwhile, be curious, be open, and be well.